Of course, we are embarking on a new time. Well, certainly Australia is. They're about to enter uncharted territory because from December 10th, millions of young people under the age of 16 will be kicked off major social media platforms, including Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitch, and others. This, of course, follows the new legislation which is forcing tech companies to verify the ages of users or face fines up to 50 million Aussie dollars. For many teens, this means losing years of posts, photos, friendships, projects, and online identities. Joining us now to discuss the pros and cons of this move is South Africa's leading social media law expert, Emma Sadlier. Emma, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to speak to you.
Emma, this isn't as simple as telling teens overnight they may no longer engage on the social media platforms they've been using, some of them, for many years, is it?
No, it really isn't. And I do have sympathy for some of these kids, as much as I'm hugely in favor of age gating social media, of this ban that Australia has brought out, that the world leaders, other countries have already started following. I do appreciate that it can be a pretty alarming thing. It happened to me last year, Amy, where I was locked out of my WhatsApp account for 24 hours. And I felt I can't even tell you how I felt. Like, firstly, I had a whole lot more free time. Secondly, it was a huge panic that I'd lost all the history of my chats, all the photos, everything. So I do appreciate that it's a pretty scary thing for these children, especially for those of them who have lived and breathed these social media platforms for a long time. If you've got any tweens or teens in your life, you'll know how important it is for them to keep up, for example, their Snapchat streaks. And now suddenly their social media world is going to go dark. So it isn't a very easy thing. What most companies have come out and said is that you can deactivate your account for a period up to 3 years or until you turn 16.
Mm.
So that means at least that historical content won't be lost. And a lot of the platforms allow you to go and download in one file all of the content you've posted. But it does require a bit of forethought and a bit of planning.
And as you say, I mean, for some of these kids, depending on their parents and what they've been allowed to do, but some of them will have been using social media for 4 or 5 years now. Say they're 15, they're just under the legal age, and they are suddenly going to have all of this identity taken away from them. So what are people or parents being urged to do to guide them through this process? Because I think for a lot of them, it is going to be very jarring, as you said, even yourself losing WhatsApp for 24 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hopefully they haven't been on for 3 or 4 years, because most of these platforms have an existing age restriction of 13. That, of course, should be higher because it's not like X/Twitter is a safe place for
No.
13-year-olds, even though the age restriction is 13. So at best, there should be sort of 2 or 3 years worth of content if they're just about to turn 16. But it's you know. I think that the whole move has to be welcomed. And yes, there are going to be teething problems, and yes, there are going to be people who slip through the cracks, and kids who will go off to the local fancy dress store and buy an old person's mask and use it for the age verification, the AI age verification. There, of course, are going to be exceptions. Amy, just like when I was a teenager, people had fake IDs and used to go
Mm.
and buy alcohol with their fake IDs. There are always going to be ways to circumvent these rules. But I think if we can just always agree at the outset that this is a positive move, and yes, Australia is leading the way, so there's going to be a lot of teething problems. I really think that all of those teething problems can be overcome and are worth it, considering the huge gain that's going to come with this ban. If nothing else, just for parents to sit around a dining room table with their children and say, well, what do you think the age of internet adulthood should be? If you think about the kind of content that's available on these platforms, Amy, like they shouldn't be seen by 11,
Yeah.
12, 13-year-olds. Sometimes I feel like it shouldn't be seen by me, and I'm 40. So I do, and more we know how addictive these platforms are. And all addictive substances are age gated, whether it's gambling or drinking alcohol, some lawful drugs, and it just has been mad to me that we've been allowing kids as young as we have been onto these platforms, which are entirely unsafe for them.
Emma, I have to say, when I first heard about this proposed ban, I was quite opposed to it. I thought, oh, there goes Australia living in a, heavily policed society once again. And more I'm leaning towards the opposite direction. As you say, I think it is potentially actually a very good thing. And I'm also interested in watching Norway and what they're doing in lobbying to bring the age limit higher for using
And Amy, if I
social.
can interrupt you there, what I think a country that I think is doing the most unbelievably interesting work is France. So they've just prepared a report to the French Parliament about age gating. Again, what should that age be? Either 15 or 16 years old. But there's some other great things they're thinking about, like having a social media curfew where the social media platforms for teenagers are shut down between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I think that's such an interesting out the box idea. But I can tell you, I'm on the ground and I see these kids coming to school absolutely exhausted because they just can't put their phones down at night, which I have huge sympathy for. Like I can't stop scrolling sometimes at night. And I teach this stuff. And the other interesting crime that they're talking about introducing in France is the crime of digital negligence, which is where we see parents literally allowing children to be online for 16, 18, 20 hours a day from when they're literally infants. Because we do see that happening. I know it sounds like a startling idea, but we do. And I think that's quite cool too. So, I mean, some of it feels a little nanny state-ish. I think that, and I'm on the ground, I know what these kids are seeing. The average age of first exposure to pornography, for example, in South Africa is 11 years
Yeah,
old. I would say it's actually more like 9 years old.
yeah.
And if we can kind of get together as parents and say, even absent legislation like this, let's all hold out for as long as possible. I really just think it's the longer we can hold out, the greater the benefit for our children.
I'm with you on that, Emma. And I was actually reading an article published by the World Economic Forum last month about the measures that Japan is taking to curb the rising tide of smartphone addiction. And in Japan, the numbers are far, far lower than they are here. And they referred to a study that's been done globally, which shocked me because it said South Africa has the third highest screen time in the world. South Africa. And that's obviously the adults. And it goes on to talk about the impact that vast screen time has. What is it doing to our children? As you say, they are too tired to go to school in the morning.
They're too tired to go to school in the morning. They're exposed to predators at a very, very young age when they're far too naive to understand the kinds of risks that they find themselves in. There is immense cyberbullying that goes on, harassment, image-based violence. I can't even tell you how many cases over the weekend, and I say I can't tell you because I literally wouldn't be able to count them, of children being groomed to send nude pictures, sextorted, deep fake nudes, children landing up becoming gambling addicts at such a young age. We're seeing influencers targeting children to get into online gambling from as young as 11 years old. These kids having crypto trading accounts. I mean, it's just that the world of the online world is just not a place for children whose brain hasn't finished developing. And I know that only happens much, much later. But the worst content I see, and I'm the first responder when things go wrong in South Africa, so I've got a very good idea about what's going on. The worst content I see is in the age range 10 to 14 years old. Those kids are just too little. For me, it really is not hyperbolic to say that giving your 10-year-old a smartphone is like giving them the keys to a Ferrari and saying, good luck to you, and not training them and not making sure that they have licenses or understand the rules of the road, or that we all know that the brain development that is required to make the kinds of decisions that are called upon a driver in South Africa's dangerous driving territory. The same kind of issues apply online.
Cheapers, Emma, it's absolutely terrifying. Do you think there's any likelihood that we would see lobbying in South Africa for similar legislation?
So we already have lobbying in terms of trying to get tech out of schools, trying to make sure schools are phone-free,
Yeah.
campuses, certainly in high school during the academic school day, primary school, pretty much entirely. So there are various petitions to the minister, etc., on that. The big problem we face here is that the companies that would be required to comply with age gating are not based in South Africa. Meta does have some presence here. So Meta owns Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, but ByteDance, which owns TikTok and Snap, they don't have businesses in South Africa. So unless our government got brave enough to say, look, unless you comply with our rules, we're going to turn you off in our country, which isn't going to happen. It's very difficult. We can have the legislation, surely. We can pass the law in Parliament, but a law is only as good as its enforcement.
Yeah.
And if these companies are not here, it's not like we can find them. It's not like we can imprison directors because they don't have a presence in South Africa. Our only real strong move would be to say, okay, TikTok, you're not going to play by our rules. We're going to turn you off in South Africa. That would make them sit up and listen. Our government's not going to do that.
We'll have to leave it there. But Emma Sadlier, thank you so much for joining us and for scaring us. But I think it's an important conversation to have. Emma Sadlier, South Africa's leading social media law expert, and she was on the Zoom there, actually, from Johannesburg.